If you're just joining us, Cal and I are kind of hanging out, chit-chatting before the webinar, so you haven't missed anything. We're just getting started. We got a poll live that you can throw your where you're at in terms of the AI journey. And we're just talking about Clubhouse. So if you're a Clubhouse user, like a huge fanatic, or you hate it, either way, throw in the chat your opinions of Clubhouse, because I'm trying to figure it out. So where are you at, Cal?
I hate it. Personally, okay. I hate it.
And what do you hate about? Like, what is the? I have my reasons, but what is your?
I don't know. Mine is probably a dumb reason, but whenever there's this herd mentality where everybody just wants to clamor into being a part of an exclusive thing, and then all of a sudden it's not so exclusive, I'm kind of just watching and waiting to see what happens. And I thought it was so funny you brought up GDPR. It's like, when's the other shoe gonna drop?
Yeah. When are they going to get busted for what they're doing? But then LinkedIn does the same thing. Like LinkedIn lets you connect your contacts to. They all do it. Like it's, but I'm sort of with you, and it's. I always laugh when this happens. Like when Google Plus came around, I had the same feeling. But back in 2007, I vividly recall a conversation with one of my coworkers, and she's like, you got to get on Twitter. And I was like, no, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Like, I am not getting on Twitter. Like, I don't have the time for that. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And then I did, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, she was right. And
now we live on Twitter.
Yeah. And so I was actually talking to somebody yesterday, and I said, I don't think it's just going to die. Like, I don't think it's going to go the way of Google Plus necessarily, but it's not going to be Twitter, in my opinion. And I feel like once humans can be with other humans, it really loses its value dramatically, and it becomes a radio show. And then you just have like regularly scheduled, and like, where does podcasting in it fall? Like I don't care enough to study it right now.
It's just for what it's worth, I can't wait to get back to normal conferences and meeting everybody and just hanging out. I'm going to put my phone on airplane mode, not check email, and
for like a month.
Enjoy being around like humans.
Yeah, I the way I'm starting to feel is like you can sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel now. And it's making me actually think about being with other humans, whereas before I was just pretending like someday, and I just wouldn't think about it. And now that you see like, oh, maybe by like end of May in the US, we have enough vaccines for everyone who's willing to get them. Then I'm like, oh man, you mean by June, like I might be able to see people and hang out with people, and maybe in the fall go to a conference. Like now I'm starting to kind of long for those days. And yeah, I miss it a lot.
Low key, I actually booked my ticket hoping that one of my favorite conferences decides to go in person. Right? I'm already like, yes, it's in the fall, please.
Yeah, my wife and I have our 20th wedding anniversary in September. Awesome. And I told her a while ago, I was like, wherever you want to go, like just, you pick it, anywhere in the world, we'll take the kids and go. And I'm starting to think like, should we go ahead and book that? Like, should I take a flyer that by September we'll be able to go somewhere? Because I don't know.
Prices are never going to be lower, and you can always roll it over.
I know. So if you're just joining us, obviously Cal and I are just kind of hanging out, chit chatting, talking a little Clubhouse and end of the pandemic, and I don't know, a little bit of AI maybe. So we've got a poll up about where you're at in your journey. If you're just getting started, trying to figure out what AI is, you're in that researching phase, trying to really understand it and its potential, that second stage, piloting where you're running some pilot projects, scaling where it's like you've got multiple programs, you're seeing success from them, and then humanizing, which, is really aligned with what we're going to talk about today, where you're kind of redistributing resources saved from AI to invest in your team, your community, your leadership. You're finding ways to become more human, if you will, through AI. So as you're coming in, if you want to take that poll, we'll get started in a minute here officially. But welcome everybody who's joined us so far. We were saying Cal and I are neither of us are big Clubhousers, and I actually just tweeted that an hour ago. I was like, "Is Clubhouser?" Like, I don't know what you call someone who uses Clubhouse, but I'll go with Clubhouser. I'm doing my first tonight. We're doing one with Market Muse. If you're joining us now and you're familiar with Market Muse, there's they do a Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on AI and content and SEO. So we're joining them tonight at 5 to talk. And this is my first Clubhouse event, session, meeting, whatever.
So if you're an attendee, does that make you a Clubhousee?
I don't. Is it a Clubhouse or a Clubhouse or do we get to decide that? Like, has that been decided yet?
I don't know. These are the big questions.
Should we trademark it? Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. Clubhouse I hadn't thought about that one. All right, so we're coming up on a minute past the hour, so we'll get started. So we've got a poll. Give 10 more seconds here if you just joined us and you want to answer this poll. Pretty interesting. Why we have no one scaling AI and we have one person piloting it. That's good. I mean, it's kind of like that beginner audience, which is really, tends to be ours. Let me end this and share results. So you should be seeing the results now coming in. So there, we've got 58% are at the researching phase with AI, trying to figure out what it is. We've got 50% that are also at the understanding. And again, it was multiple choice, so you can be at multiple stages. We've got 8% actually piloting AI in their organization. No one is scaling it, and 4% are humanizing it. So this would be good. This is like kind of, I mean, that's nice context going in. So yeah, let's get started. We're past the top of the hour. So Cal, go ahead and fire us up. So this is human-centered AI, the superpower marketers need to harness in 2021. Awesome title, which I didn't come up with it, so I can say awesome title because it was not me that created it.
Well, seeing just the results of the poll, I'm just so excited. You're in good company. Now is the time to really start diving into this. So great place to get started.
Yep. Awesome. And if this is your first time, so we do this once or twice a month. We have this webinar series as part of Marketing AI Institute. You can see it, that bit.ly link. You can access, there's probably about a dozen or so on demand, some incredible ones with HubSpot and Drift and Mobile Walla and Market Muse. There's some great topics. And we just try and find industry leaders who can help at this understanding, piloting, and scaling phase. And as we just saw in the poll results, most people are in that researching and understanding phase. And so as Cal said, you're in good company. Like you haven't missed the boat. Like if this is the first time you're doing an AI webinar, you're not behind the times. The vast majority of the market is still trying to figure this out. So you're in a good place, and welcome. Go ahead, Cal. This is Cal Al-Dhubaib. Cal, say hi.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. Just a quick snippet about myself. I'm a data scientist and entrepreneur, and I started Pandata, a design and development firm that helps organizations get started with AI about 5 years ago now. And we're really, really focused on putting the human into the AI.
Yeah, and Cal and I have known each other for a few years now. We're actually both Cleveland guys, which is awesome to have, people like Cal in the market who are doing really innovative things here. But what I've always loved about Cal is like he's a data scientist who can actually talk to an average person. Like it's often hard. Like if you work at a bigger enterprise, you can appreciate like when you're dealing with the engineers and the data scientists, sometimes we're just not speaking the same language. And so I think what Cal's always excelled at is actually making AI approachable, which is kind of what we're trying to do at the Institute. It's how do we actually make this make sense to marketing managers, directors, VPs, CMOs? How do we kind of bridge the gap between the scientists and the marketers so that we can all kind of move the industry forward together? And if you don't know me, I'm Paul Raitzer, the founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute. I also own a marketing agency, PR 2020, which was HubSpot's first partner back in 2007. And so some people may know me from that business. And as I mentioned, our mission. So the Marketing AI Institute is a media company, first and foremost. It's all about, building an audience and trying to help them understand and apply AI. So that's how we do it, is largely through educational content, through the blog, through webinars, through online courses. And then we offer an event also. So education and events is really the two core ways that we connect the dots. And we started in 2016, and it's grown quite a bit. We split it off as its own company in 2019, raised some seed money to accelerate the growth. And today you can see, it's really starting to grow in terms of the contact subscriber base, the website traffic, the online academy, and the conference itself, which will return in 2021. It will be a virtual event this year. We haven't given a final announcement on the date, but I can tell you if you're on this webinar, that is imminent. It's coming in the next couple of weeks. We'll be announcing the dates for the virtual event. And then we have every intention of bringing it back as an international conference live and in person in 2022.
I cannot wait. It was a great group of speakers, and I just can't wait for us to all be back together
It
again.
was, I think you might even be hiding in one of those. Yeah, there you are in the top photo on the right,
Oh, that's
celebrating
funny.
it up. But look at that, hanging out with
Humans.
humans, arms around each other. Like, man, I miss that. But yeah, this is a great event. And so our belief is that AI is just going to transform the industry. It's going to transform business, going to transform marketing, trillions of dollars in annual impact. But as we saw in the poll at the beginning, we're all just trying to figure this out. We're all sort of at that beginner stage, trying to understand what it is and how to apply it. And so that's what we've got Cal here for today. Again, to really, if this is your first time, again, he's going to walk you through the basics. But if you're already familiar with it, he's going to do it through a lens that may be new to you. So, it's a really approachable conversation. I'll hang out throughout in case, Cal and I want to talk about anything. The Q&A is open. The chat pane's open. So yeah, if you've got things throughout, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cal and let him do his thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, AI is no longer a conversation of this technology is coming. AI and artificial intelligence, it's here. It's getting embedded in tools and software and platforms that we all touch and see on a regular basis. Everything from lead scoring that you might see in a CRM tool like HubSpot or Salesforce, to getting a little bit more sophisticated and starting to deal with sentiment analysis and social listening on different social channels. And there's some really exciting use cases that are coming out that are taking advantage of the fact that data is getting really commoditized, and not just boring spreadsheets, but images, voice, audio, text. There's some really cool tools out there actually that are coming out that are starting to get into identifying features and aspects of creative. And so now is the time to really start getting comfortable with understanding the art of the possible, so that you can start thinking about where this belongs and where it fits within the context of your organization. And it would behoove us, before talking a whole lot about AI, to define what we mean by artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, with any emerging technology, if you ask 10 different professionals that are data scientists today to define what AI is, you're going to get 10 slightly different answers. And I like this because it's real simple, foundational approach. Artificial intelligence is fundamentally software that excels at automating tasks and not jobs that are traditionally thought of as human, like listening, seeing, understanding, comprehending. It does this by being able to recognize and react to complex patterns and a variety of different data sets. And as we just said, data is not just boring old spreadsheets anymore. It's image, audio, you name it. There's a lot of different multimedia that is now becoming a part of this broader definition of data. And ultimately, artificial intelligence can grow and learn to improve over time. So when we talk about why AI, you'll hear these common value propositions: automation, reducing human error, reducing risk, increasing the availability, and increasing speed. But what I want to talk about is flipping these very automated, tactical value propositions on their head and talk about the human benefit here for just a moment. When we automate certain tasks that are otherwise tedious, what we're doing there is making the job of the professional more fulfilling. We're getting out of the way of those very cumbersome tasks. When we're reducing error, we're not removing humans from the work. What we're doing is we're amplifying the human quality of work that we can put into action. When we talk about reducing risk, we can actually start using AI in meaningful ways to start combating bias, self-reinforcing perspectives and points of view. And increasing availability can redirect our most precious commodity, which is time, so that your human professionals, whether they're in customer service, marketing, or sales, are spending their time on really pressing challenges and able to get to that more strategic work and not stuck in the day-to-day of routine. And ultimately, the ability to reduce time, and just to give you an example here, it might take a human quality assurance specialist about an hour to listen to 1 hour's worth of audio and then get to the work of trying to understand what issues there were. You can train an algorithm now to listen to 1,000 hours worth of conversation in less than a minute. And what that does is it reduces time for the human to produce output and insights. So again,
Cal, just real quick, just to build on that example, because it just made me think of this as you're saying it. We're doing this exact thing. So we're writing a book right now. And what we did is we went and took all of our podcasts, webinars, interviews I've done, used AI to do transcription of all that audio. And then we're going to use content summarization and extraction to actually find the key points within it. So like a super practical example that a lot of people probably do and don't think about all the text, that unstructured data that's sitting in voice when you've already created it. So just to add a unique use case for everybody to think about.
Absolutely. And I want to challenge you throughout this and other presentations you may attend to start thinking about where's the human value proposition when we talk about AI, because that's when the magic starts happening. So I wanted to take a moment and just quickly talk about how machines learn. So I love animals. You'll see lots of animals in my presentations. But just a poll to the audience, if you were to think for just a minute, how would a machine learning algorithm take these two sets of data and differentiate between squirrels and cats? What do you think it might key in on here?
I love this one because, again, I had seen something similar. So when you and I were talking in advance, I kind of knew a little bit, and I've heard the the horror stories of how it does learn. But yeah, so this is I don't want to tip it off by like giving insight so far, but
this is really cool. I'm excited about the results that we're seeing.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about each option? Like I'll give people maybe 30 more seconds, but talk about why it might use tails, why it might use ears, or maybe why that might not be the best way to do it.
So machine learning, which is the technology we're going to talk about in a little bit, that powers a lot of the advancements we've seen in AI, depends on big patterns in data and trying to extract patterns by looking at collections of things. And so it might make sense for it to key in on, the ears, or it tries to look for patterns that it can distinguish again and again and again. And this is a cute example here. Now, the thing is, machine learning.
Cal, real quick. Okay. As he's talking, almost half of you said none of the above. In the chat, before he tells it, I want to know, what would it look at that's none of the above? So if you know, or if you have an idea in the chat, I'd like to see if anybody has that. Okay, so sorry, go ahead and continue, but I want to see if everybody gets
Let's just get straight to the punchline here. Machine learning is lazy. It looks for the easiest way to distinguish two things, and it doesn't think in the way humans think.
We got silhouette and eyes so far, by the way. So people are, this is good. I'm interested to see if anybody actually gets this.
Should I share the secret?
No. Keep going for a second. I want to see if anybody else has any idea. I'm going to stay on here until somebody gets it.
So I can't stress this enough. Machine learning is lazy, and it tries to look for the simplest way to recognize these patterns, and it doesn't bring human context of prior experiences to the table. In reality, it doesn't know what a cat is. It doesn't know what a squirrel is. It doesn't know what a skateboard is, and it doesn't know how to pull these things out on their own. So without any of that prior knowledge, when it looks at these two sets, and of course you'd need more images here, but if it were just looking at these two sets, the laziest thing it could do is pick out the grass and say, okay, any picture you show me with grass is definitely a squirrel.
Julie wins. She actually got the environment, indoors or outdoors. So that good job, Julie. That is the answer here.
I love that. Just the overwhelming amount of green is the easiest way to distinguish. And so it's really important to start thinking about how machines learn versus how humans learn as we start talking about these use cases. And just to elaborate on that a little bit more, why data is so important for AI, we bring our prior experiences and context to play when we're looking at patterns. So we can look at one image of Fluffy, the cat, on the left, and we can recognize that, those two images are also Fluffy from different angles. The AI doesn't even know what a cat is. It doesn't know what perspective is or depth is. And so it's learning these patterns from scratch each and every time. In fact, it might need 100 different angles of just Fluffy alone to recognize Fluffy in the future. And that's because it's almost starting from scratch each and every time. Now, there's a lot of pre-trained models and algorithms out there that are starting to commoditize this, but it's important to understand and appreciate why, when we talk about building AI and machine learning, it's synonymous with large scales of data. That's because it's trying to learn this context each and every time.
Hey, Cal, real quick. So JW made a great point, and I think I don't know if you touched on this as you were talking about the grass. Just because the machine learns the grass doesn't mean it's correct. And that's where machine learning can go wrong. So JW made that comment, like a squirrel could be inside. Yes, that's the point, is it actually can be incorrect, and thus the human in the loop.
Absolutely. And so, there's clearly a lot of value in machine learning and AI, and the magic starts happening when you're pairing these two pieces together. So machine learning is often used synonymously with AI, and I just wanted to break it down real quick what it means. When we talk about machine learning, we're talking about the process wherein we can take a variety of input data sets and try to recognize some sort of output or train it to produce some sort of output. And you can mix and match any sort of input and output. You can take images, text, spreadsheets, logs, you name it, and pair it with example phrases you want to produce, categories that you want to be able to predict or detect in the future. And so machine learning is the process wherein you start mapping these types of inputs to the outputs you desire. And part of the art of understanding use cases is learning how you map those two together to start producing really, really cool outputs. So just real briefly, a question I get asked a lot is, so what about AI? How's it different than traditional automation? If we were to just focus on an example in customer experience, if you were to try to build a system to categorize and flag comments that are inflammatory, you would traditionally have to build a whole list of keywords that you're looking for. Versus machine learning doesn't need to know the explicit words. It can learn to recognize things that are of similar nature or similar patterns. And so it can deal with situations it may not have seen before. And what's holding people back? This is a survey that was conducted back in 2020 by Appen by over 1,000 different AI and data science executives. And the top 3 reasons that are holding organizations from getting started with AI is culture not recognizing the importance, difficulty identifying appropriate business cases, and then lack of skilled people. And I want to emphasize that for a little bit. When we hear AI machine learning, we automatically start thinking about the elusive data scientists that need to build these things. I would argue that the root cause for a lot of these challenges isn't the lack of availability of data scientists, but the lack of AI translators. And by attending this webinar, you are taking the very first step in starting to learn how to meet data scientists halfway, how to recognize use cases, and be able to understand how data selection and choices influence the quality and capabilities of machine learning and AI tools. So that being said, I want to jump into some stories. And in these stories here, I'm going to share some words because AI is experimental in nature. It's a process of development and iteration. And I want you to understand what it takes to go from, hey, we have a use case here to actually building a viable solution. So in this first one, we partnered with an organization, a healthcare organization, we partnered with a Fortune 500 organization that started to collect qualitative data at scale from their customers. They were looking at Net Promoter Score. And for those of you who are familiar, Net Promoter Score is a simple question. How likely are you to do business with us again, or recommend your peers to do business with us in the future on a scale from 1 to 10? 9s and 10s are promoters. They're 6 times more likely to buy from you. Your detractors are 6s and unders. And so it's a great, powerful question. And then there's a follow-up question, the why. So this organization had collected 60,000 comments, a quarter of them were in a foreign language, and growing. They're now at over 100,000 survey responses, which is not huge, but it's beyond the capacity of a human to start looking at. Their quality assurance team was dealing with spot issues and not spending enough time solving systemic problems and challenges. This is where we came in. And to highlight why text is such a problem, humans speak in very unpredictable ways, and keywords alone don't work. So if you look at that first green line here for this cat toy review, good for some cats. Good is traditionally a good word, but in context here, it's actually a negative word. And so this is why having machine learning algorithms look at properly classified examples is really, really important here, to move beyond just what you would find by searching brute force alone and starting to recognize these more complex patterns. So what we did with the client is we started pulling out some initial clusters, and we worked with them to label example comments that had groupings of themes or key phrases. And we came up with a handful of categories. We did a really interesting experiment here. We had each comment get reviewed by 3 different customer experience professionals to see how well they agreed on consistency. So if they said this was about finding information, how likely were they all to agree it was about finding information? And what we found was really, really interesting. So in this top chart here, this was the percent of time for each of the different topics that we had with this client that human experts agreed it belonged to that category. And just to bring in the bottom half of this, they all pretty much agreed when a comment was about a representative, but they had very poor agreement when it had to do with customer relationship or self-service on the website. And what was interesting is the bottom is our model's ability to identify those types of comments. That's our accuracy. And what you'll see is there's a very, very strong correlation between human agreement and the accuracy of the model. So there's a lot of power in understanding that if humans can't agree, if subject matter experts can't agree, it's really, really hard to get the models and algorithms to agree. And so the outcomes here were really cool. We put the results of our model and what we were able to tag in the comments in this interactive dashboard, where they could pair now quantitative information, net promoter score, with qualitative information. What are some examples of things people are saying that fall into that category? Where are they excelling and where are they not excelling? And this helped them accelerate their time to move from identifying insight to actual problem solving. And ultimately, their net promoter score improved by 20% over the course of the following year. Really powerful results. The next iteration of this is working on their call center data. A call center that processes 100,000 calls a year, each lasting about 5 minutes, is about 8,000 hours of your customers telling you exactly what they need. Imagine the power of applying the same process there. And this is really starting to grow momentum as a new area for opportunity, just to get you thinking. So when we talk about AI, there are 2 processes that happen that are equally important that lead to project success. The first is design, where you're trying to iterate and experiment through capability, methodology, maybe even the right tool if you're not building it yourself. And developing is taking that tool and getting it into the hands of the users in a sustainable way, where you're actually driving business decisions. So I'm going to share another case story that walks through some of these phases here. We partnered with a software company that works with insurance organizations to identify patients that qualify for additional reimbursements from the government. So it's essentially a lead qualifying process from a lot of different databases. They have over 30 million patient lives, and they have tens of thousands of features on these patients, everything from their medical claims history and their demographics to where they live and other characteristics about them, not unlike a sales database or transactional database that larger enterprise organizations may have access to. There are 2 levers for their profitability. One is their ability to identify these patients that would qualify and reaching out to them. And 2, identifying leads that they were reaching out to that maybe weren't fits sooner, so that they're not spending time on patients that would ultimately not convert. And this is a cartoon of what it looks like. Starting at the left, they have the insurance organizations where they're pulling all these data from the different organizations. They had some rules engines where they were looking at certain conditions or codes that applied to these patients. And they'd find ones that they were fairly confident would qualify with the government. They'd reach out, and some fraction of those respond. Their call center processes them, helps them apply to the government, and those who are approved by the government ultimately get reimbursed. And so this organization gets some revenue share from that. Starting with the human subject matter experts here, starting with the folks that were helping to process these patients. It was really, really important for us to understand that the accept stage, where they were determining who they would help apply, was actually a little bit more important than the ultimate government decision, because these human experts had a lot of context, and they actually had a really good sense that wasn't being captured by the rules engine. So step 1 is understanding the human decision-making process and using that as the target to train our model, instead of starting at the end or the traditional, where is the money coming from? We were able to use some natural language processing to enrich data they already had. And for those of you who don't know what medical codes are, think of them as a very, very rich taxonomy that start with high-level things like heart condition and get down to really, really specific codes. They might be nested and related to each other, but there are also conditions that are from different sides of the tree that might be related. And so by tapping into, instead of that hierarchy as specified by standards and starting to look at the text descriptions here, we were able to build a more rich representation of synonyms and things that were closer to each other. And that helped us take the rules engine to the next level using a machine learning approach. Now, here's the kicker. Their initial close rate was 10%. When we piloted this, our close rate was 2%. That is not, it was so bad.
Doesn't take a data scientist to do the math on that one.
And so we had to unpack the why, right? We, in our initial models, we said, hey, we can identify 30% more people than they were already looking at. But when it came time to pilot, our performance was so bad. Now, there are a handful of reasons behind this. One, we didn't have the buy-in we thought we did. The sales team that was reaching out and qualifying these patients, they didn't, their closes or their incentives depended on their closes. And so when we were introducing a new source of leads, they didn't trust them. They didn't act on them. They didn't trust these leads because it was just a, hey, our new model identified this, not our new model identified it and here's why. And these patients looked a little bit different than the patients they were used to dealing with. So it was, they weren't really willing to give it a chance. And that's what led to our initial failure. So there's this building resilience stage that is so important in the life cycle of any AI project. Inevitably, things will go wrong. They will surprise you. Perhaps a new process is needed and you need some change management, or maybe even the data in the real world or in the real use case looks a little bit different than what you're used to. So it's really, really important to take a step back and understand that and prepare yourself for as you're going through these AI solutions. It's not just a straight shot. You want to go through this healthy building resilience phase to get to that ultimate ability to drive business decisions. This has a happy ending here. Once we got down to the bottom of that and worked on investing in building a more interpretable model, invested in educating the team and understanding why they could trust this new model and this new approach, our ultimate impact has resulted in an 11% monthly revenue growth for this client to date. And there's power in that. Again, bringing the human full circle, learning from their wisdom, and empowering them to use this tool is what got us to the outcome. So just another note on building resilience, and to break this down into a handful of things that you might encounter. The first might be a process where incentives aren't aligned and you want to make sure that you're investing in appropriate change management as part of your rollout. Another thing that could go wrong could be usability, whether that's the ability of the decision makers that are working with this tool to understand or trust results, or might be something like the dashboard that needs to be designed to help the end user more readily access the insights that they need to access. And then finally, there might be some data discrepancies. Sometimes you may find that, and in the case of this one client, they were expanding rapidly to new geographic regions. And so we had to periodically re-update this model as we saw new patterns entering the norm. And to go back to the customer experience example, the things people talk about change over time, and that's okay and that's expected. You want to start thinking about when data might change and invest in retraining or revisiting any solutions that you roll out. And this building resilience, again, it's a natural part of the process. So human-centered AI, and I just want to talk about the common themes between the last two and a half use cases. I'll call the voice use case a half use case, is they all put humans at their center. And so I want to define what it means to have human-centered AI. One is it starts with maximizing human value. In each of these use cases, the goal wasn't to automate a process. The goal was to augment humans by automating very specific tedious tasks to help them get better at their jobs. The solutions were transparent. In the case of our evolution with the sales example, we had to provide interpretable outputs and the so what, in addition to what we were recommending. And this is actually a really, really big trend in the field. We've gotten so good at predicting things, but not as good at explaining them or interpreting them. And so human-centered AI requires that to be a core feature. The results are transparent, so you can go back and you can audit results and understand what decisions were made and why, and look underneath the hood of the model. And finally, they're fair. It takes into consideration potential biases that may exist within the data and safeguards against them. In the case of that sales example, we are actually able to look at whether or not our model was favoring geographic regions where there were bigger racial disparities. And we were able to help this client identify that there were, in fact, discrepancies, not on their selection side, but actually on the government approval side for who was getting reimbursement. And so starting to think about how you can make tools more fair, more representative, is also a really, really big push of what it means to have humans at the center of AI solutions. And I don't know, Paul, if this is resonating with you, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on just this definition of human-centered AI.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, again, I think one of the issues, especially at the beginner level, is that people assume AI is some magic switch. It's just like, oh, I heard AI is this magical thing. I'll go get it to do the parts of my job I hate, and I'll buy that tool, pay my monthly fee, and I won't have to think about that anymore. And I think, as Cal has made pretty clear so far, is like, that is not how this works. There is human oversight. The human is almost always in the loop. There's often lots of training that needs to go in. But to his point, and as a data scientist, like, one of his passions is you have to start by understanding the data that everything's being built on, that's training the models, and any human bias that may already exist. Because I mean, at best, it's going to have a human level bias in it. If it can remove some of that, that's great. But I mean, the reality is, anything built, like, if we weren't using AI, software is going to have human bias in it. Like, it's inescapable. And so I think it's just so critical for marketers, even at the very beginning of trying to understand AI, that you at least have ethics, diversity, bias. Like, these are topics that are rolling around in your mind, that at the end of the day, we're not trying to automate people out of jobs. We're trying to enrich your lives with smarter technology. And so I just love the whole idea of, like, the human at the center is critical.
And don't leave it to the data scientists. We're trying our best, but we need you to engage in these conversations. So I share this not to scare you away, but to get you excited about the opportunity of asking these questions. There's power in that. Have conversations about it. Partner with data scientists to unpack some of these issues.
Yeah, and again, I know we're not diving deep into diversity on this one, but when you think about how products are built, and that the software, the companies that you buy software from, how diverse are the teams building those products? Because if they're not bringing in multiple perspectives in the development of it and how it's going to be used, then there's going to be limitations to how well it may service your market. And so again, we're not going to cover all this in a 40-minute webinar today, but I just think it's such an important thing that people are realizing. This isn't flip a switch and AI solves things or automates things you hate. That is not what we're here, not what the Institute exists for. We're trying to move the ball forward on the more human side. So,
and the good news is there's a lot of room to do things, because we haven't even scratched the surface. This is the real work of AI. We see a lot of these flashy use cases, but you all have a really, really cool opportunity to develop more meaningful solutions, more human-centered solutions. And that's going to be the next evolution in the AI world. And just to kind of go back to, the example of bias, we looked at the cats versus squirrels. It could be something as harmless as maybe your data set doesn't depict the full picture that you need to solve the problem. But there are some very, very real harms and concerns that happen when you're not taking this into consideration. I can nerd out about that all day, but I'm going to keep going with this content here on automation versus augmentation. So Amazon is a brand name that we widely view as a leader in AI. They noted as recently as 2017 that majority of their AI use cases were quietly improving processes versus the stuff that you expect to see. So products that you might like, the integrated chatbots that we're seeing on different websites. These are very visible aspects and they seem automated, but the power is, and the reality is a lot of these use cases lean more towards augmentation, like the stories I just shared. And that's the stuff that you might not be seeing as much of. And the degree to which you balance between automation and augmentation really depends on the use case. So think about a chatbot, for example. If you had a relatively low risk scenario where you're just helping answer some basic questions about your products, and it's not healthcare focused, not super high risk, maybe you have a threshold of, you have a chatbot that responds when it's 80% confident. And if it's not confident, it routes it to a human. Again, there's the value proposition if your humans are dealing with the more atypical, out of routine, higher valued questions, and you have your chatbot dealing with quick hits that helps improve your team satisfaction and also meets your customer needs. You might have another situation where you really only want the chatbot working when it's 90% confident or 95% confident. So there's always a degree, and very rarely in my experience is it all or nothing. And that's a really important thing to take into consideration as you start considering where you want to apply AI within your organization. So identifying opportunities. I really like to think about this as the intersection of three things. Sorry about that. Data, decisions, and opportunity. So starting with data, in most cases, many organizations think of data assets as whatever's in their database, spreadsheets, raw numbers. What data do you have or are you sitting on that you haven't historically taken advantage of? Whether it is call center recordings, qualitative feedback from customers, reviews on online websites that you could be scraping, social listening capabilities. What are these unstructured data sets that you might not have historically taken advantage of? And what are some opportunities to enrich data you have today with additional insights? Next is decisions. Where are humans in your organization making impactful and frequent decisions that are really of high importance? And this brings me to this last one, is the opportunity to create value, right? What is it that is consuming the effort of your team today? And more importantly, what does that keep them from getting to? And a really good rule of thumb is to start asking the question of, when are humans in your organization acting more like robots? And we do that when we are looking at patterns over and over and over again. It's monotonous tasks. And a good rule of thumb is generally if humans can agree, or subject matter experts that are equally trained will agree and arrive at the same conclusion. Chances are you're looking at a really good opportunity to apply some AI. And here's some more concrete, tangible questions for you to start qualifying these opportunities. The deck will be sent out and this will be made available after the webinar. But just to go through these, where are humans spending the time? And the really cool question, this is your value proposition that you can use to get buy-in across your organization. What does that keep them from getting to? That's the higher valued stuff. That's the real win with AI. As far as data goes, what are the unstructured data sets that you haven't tapped into? Are there process exhaust? And I love this one, process exhaust. It's logs or things like website analytics or things that happen as a result of using products or tools, or even doing the course of project management that we don't think of as data sources, but as insight just sitting there waiting to be used. What have you not tapped into? And what are some additional ways you can enrich your data? Whether you're bringing in sentiment using APIs, or using some pre-trained models that can deal with audio and images, what are some opportunities to unlock your data for use in machine learning and AI? And this last one is the nature of the decisions. I love Andrew Ng. He's a really, really cool thought leader in AI. And he uses this 1 second of thought rule. If it's a task that generally takes you 1 second of thought or less to do, chances are it's a really good candidate for automation. So we can look at an image and very quickly pull something out. We can look at a comment and very quickly understand the tone. These are the types of human tasks that are really well suited to developing AI solutions. And again, human agreement is a must. I loved sharing that example of where humans can agree, you can rarely ever get a model to agree or even surpass human performance. And a final thing to consider is the 2 levers of value creation. How often do these decisions happen? And what is the consequence or value opportunity as it relates to these decisions? So how do you get started? I talked about a lot of different things. There's clearly a lot of deep issues, from bias to actually identifying these use cases, but this is the very first step. And the thing that I recommend to all professionals, all marketers that are going down this AI translator path is get comfortable with the use cases. 2 of my favorite websites that I go to on a regular basis are Open Data Science and Data Science Central. Read about the projects that are being done, read about and understand the use cases companies are pursuing. The more fluent you get at understanding it, the more you will be able to start identifying opportunities within your own organization. And don't wait to be invited to the conversation. Have some discussions with data scientists. Go to data science conferences and start asking some of the questions that we just went over to get yourself more familiar with identifying opportunities. It just takes practice. I want to leave you with one thing before I turn it over to Paul, and it's this. Take this to heart. If there's only one thing you take out of this webinar today, it's this. We limit our potential when we think about AI only as a tool to automate, whereas instead it really is that the true value in AI is in unlocking human potential when it's paired with AI and what humans can do once we automate a lot of those mundane tasks.
That was awesome. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have a little plug for your certification course. So if you're an AI Academy member already, then you have access to Cal's certification course on AI and data for beginners already. If you're not familiar with Academy, you can check out marketingacademy.ai. There are 5 certification courses in there. Cal's is one of them. And then there's 25 to 30 additional short courses, private community, bunch of interesting stuff, access to keynotes from Macon. And really, like, the big thing for us is the growing community of like-minded peers who are trying to figure this stuff out. So yeah, check out Academy. If you have questions, reach out to the team. And if you are there, definitely take Cal's course. Again, this is just a taste of the kind of stuff Cal's able to teach and share. And his certification course is one of the best. So definitely check that out.
Thanks,
and with
Paul.
that, yeah, no, I appreciate you doing it, man. I've had our team take it. It's just such a good introduction. And Sandy just put the link to his certification course in the chat. So if you check that out. All right. So with that, we've got some questions already, but go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A, or if you prefer the chat, go ahead and use the chat. We're monitoring both. So I want to start kind of a couple of building question here. First, Cal, do you think AI is going to create more jobs than it eliminates in the coming, say, 5 to 10 years?
Hands down.
Okay.
And it's a tricky question, because the reality is when we start to talk about automating some of these tasks and expanding human capacity to handle greater workloads, the natural flip side of that is, well, clearly we can do more with less. Maybe that'll impact some jobs. In some cases, jobs are eliminated. But what we're starting to see is a whole host of new jobs are being created that we didn't even know were necessary. Everything from data curators who understand how it's being used in context of machine learning and AI systems, to AI translators who are identifying use cases and bringing them to life. Think of it as an AI product manager, to ethicists and data labelers is another really, really big one, where you have these farms and shops working on taking images and text at scale, hundreds of thousands of examples, and training them to apply the right labels to be used in context of these types of AI algorithms and models that are being built. So it's a complex question because yes, it is resulting and impacting the elimination of some jobs, but it's creating so many others. And, I hope today's webinar kind of gives everybody a sense that we can't trust the algorithms or the data scientists figure this out on their own. There's a lot of dialogue that needs to happen and a lot of human oversight that'll be necessary. So it's going to change our work to be more augmented by AI plus humans.
And a real practical example of creation, and again, it's kind of a hot button issue, but I mean, last I saw, Facebook employs over 3,000 people who monitor the news feeds and train AI on what shouldn't be on there. Now, it's a whole nother story about, is that a job anybody really wants? Because you're basically seeing the underbelly of society and having to train AI what that looks like. But thousands of jobs, and that's just one thing you experience every day in your news feed.
Yeah.
When we log into Facebook, if things aren't showing up that shouldn't be there, it's because humans are training the machine to find those things before they go viral in your news feed. So we did have a question, actually. So the building part of this. At what point timeline is AI predicted to render data scientists obsolete? Do you see yourself being out of a job?
I love that question. I get that a lot. Actually, we huddled around the team about a year ago and we were like, is this bad for our jobs and our future? And what we were seeing is that it's shifting the nature of our work as well. Yeah. Data science used to be all about these building blocks. Hey, I need to train a very specific model to recognize sentiment. I need to build the specific capability to recognize these patterns in text. And it would take a lot of time to go from idea, concept to build. And that's all we did. Today, there's a lot of these capabilities getting commoditized. And it's really, really important to understand statistics and bias and how model behavior is influenced by what is being fed into it. And the automation that's available today with AI tools and data science tools, including things like AutoML, is helping us spend less time on the setup and more time asking the right questions. I think it's a real dangerous value proposition to have someone who doesn't understand machine learning and statistics building models, even though you can with some of these tools because of some of these hazards we discussed. So I think it's going to shift the nature of our work as well to be more consultative, to be focused more on asking these big questions and how to create more interpretable, fair, human-centered solutions.
I think you're safe. I think you'll be all right for a little while.
It's shifted the nature of our work and it's more fun too. So
no, it's
that. Yeah.
Because I always get asked like, what remains human? And my answer is always creativity, empathy, strategy, intuition. Like you can't give the machine those things. And data scientists, to your point, I think they're just going to evolve. Like they're going to be more strategic. They'll be more consultative versus just crunching numbers and saying, here's the data. So no, that's great. Benefits of AI for a small marketing agency or a small business. Do you because obviously like what you talked about is a lot of more centered on like big projects. Like you're like, okay, you got a lot of data. That's not how, a lot of people may start with really small, like, oh, let me find a tool that writes my email subject lines for me or optimizes my ad spend. So when you think about more of that starter project, pilot project approach, what would you suggest or say to small businesses that might think they're going to get left behind because they don't have big budgets and big data?
So the good news is there's an explosion of software vendors using AI. Now, the flip side of that is everybody is kind of slapping AI on products and tools and services very liberally. So there's some amount of discernment that you need to bring to the table that having these sorts of discussions helps you be able to facilitate. But absolutely start with software solutions that have AI embedded in them. HubSpot, for example, and Salesforce are two examples that have AI suites and capabilities that are within reach, that they deal with the training and you're able to reap the rewards and benefits. The important thing that you want to know and you want to take into consideration is how do you have conversations with these vendors to understand what is being used to train these models and what does that mean in terms of your risk management and your performance. And you're very well equipped to ask those questions. So you don't need to be spending time building, but you certainly need to be spending time understanding the mechanics and selecting the vendors that make sense for you that are investing in these capabilities.
Yeah, it's a great point. Actually, that a question related, Sally had talked about, these B2B tech businesses, and some of them make big promises about AI marketing automation, and you just basically get Excel sheets. So what I would say is, and Sandy, if you can find it in the webinar resource page, Sandy Young from our team's with us, the webinar we did on the marketer to machine scale, the how to buy smarter tech. There's a course in Academy about it. That's a paid version. That's more extensive, but we do have a free webinar on demand about this exact issue of how do we talk to these vendors? What questions should we be asking? So that's a good resource for people if you haven't watched that webinar before. And there's a separate blog post related to it that just has sample questions, because it is like, the key for us is, as a marketer, you just need a base level understanding of what AI is and what it's capable of. So when you're talking to these vendors that are claiming they're using machine learning or deep learning or whatever they're claiming, that you can dig in and say, okay, but what does that really mean? Like, here is my job today. Here are the 10 tasks I do every week. Here's how much time I spend doing them. How is your AI going to make me better at my job, make me more efficient, improve the probability of me hitting my goals? Like, tell me why I should care, not just because you put an AI after the name of it. So, I mean, it sounds like you're on the same page.
These are the 3 questions that I would recommend, very, very basic stuff that any vendor should be able to answer with confidence. And if they don't, proceed with caution. How do you define AI, right? Why are you calling this AI?
Right.
2, how do you go about training your AI, right? And managing potential biases. And 3, talk to me about how humans are able to leverage this AI in practice. And they should really be able to have good answers for those 3 questions. Otherwise,
yeah, it's on that path. We had a question about red flags that maybe the AI is not human centered. So outside of what you just kind of outlined, are there any things that come to mind to you, like when you're talking with a vendor, that maybe gives you a clue, like they might not be taking the right approach to AI that aligns with our values as a company?
Anytime a vendor is so focused on job automation, and their language is very focused on, hey, we can do this without any insight, any oversight, this is going to automate everything, and they're not talking about how it impacts human workflow and change management, how humans can provide feedback back into the tool to make it smarter and more intelligent over time, that's a big, huge red flag. They're focused on the wrong thing there. And solutions like that are not likely to scale over time.
That's great.
Another big one is just digging into bias and representation. If the vendor can't have a good conversation, they don't need to explain how they train their models, but they should be able to talk about how they safeguard the creation of their models. How do they ensure that bias is minimized or mitigated? And how do they monitor potential unintended consequences and hold themselves accountable? Organizations that aren't doing that, it's only a matter of time before they have some massive unintended consequence, and no one's immune from this. There's plenty of examples, from Google to Facebook to Apple to lesser known organizations as well, happening all the time.
Yeah, we always say, like, at minimum, they need to have a public point of view on AI from the leadership. Like, AI can't be some faction within the organization that's building some features that's not supported by the C-suite. Like, if you're working with legit software companies, their CEO is probably on record with, this is our point of view. They're probably talking about their product roadmap. They're talking about the benefits and outcomes to the end human user. Like, they understand, versus here's our 5 AI tools, and that's basically all you can find on the site. That's not a good sign. All right, we got time for maybe one more here. So we had, at what stage of a company's life, what life stage, what within their life cycle as an organization, does it make sense to undertake adopting AI?
So I'm conflicted, because I think it needs to happen throughout, but I want to unpack that a little bit more. So when we say at what stage does it make sense to start thinking about AI, you want to start thinking about AI from day 0, right? What are the big problems that you're trying to solve? Where is it very human intensive, and could it benefit from some form of augmentation? Starting to think about those and identify those use cases and refine your understanding of use cases. And if that's all you do, that's great. That starting with that understanding and mindset on day one is critical. Now, as you start accumulating more data, having some of these tasks become more routine, and you're starting to see some good order of magnitude where you could have value proposition. A good thing to swing for is whenever a 1% difference in performance or improvement can have a meaningful impact on your budget, cost, or spend, that's usually a good rule of thumb, because at the very least, you're guaranteed to have that amount of improvement.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And we have a bunch of other questions. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions. We'll actually try and include some of those in the wrap-up post. So again, this webinar will be available on demand. We'll send out an email usually within 24 hours with access to the deck and the video. And there'll be a blog post that goes live summarizing it. So check that out. Sandy just shared a link to the next webinar, which is March 18th with Persado, and that's on AI and creativity. They have a new study they're going to be sharing, which I'm really excited about. So that's, again, a free webinar. If you can't join us live, don't worry about it, on demand to be available. And just thank you, Cal. I mean, this, again, I feel like this is such a great intro presentation, but also an intermediate. You know, if you're already a little more advanced, get your mind working. So as always, just appreciate your time and your contributions to the community. It's really valuable for our audience.
That's my pleasure. Plug to a great team at Pandata that helps make this possible. Check us out on LinkedIn. Connect with us, connect with me. I love to have these sorts of conversations and discussions.
Right.
Paul, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. Love doing it. All right. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. And like Cal said, reach out anytime. If there's anything we can do, if you have questions, we're happy to just help move the industry along and get more people interested in the topic. So we really appreciate you being here. Thanks, everybody.